You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, there is new reporting in The Guardian that Trump lawyer Evan Corcoran said that he was steered away from Trump's office at Mar-a-Lago, where the FBI then later found all of the sensitive materials during their search. How does this impact Trump's case in the stolen declassified documents case?
Brian, it certainly has the tendency to enlarge the circle of criminal conspirators. Why do I say that? Well, if people other than Donald Trump were involved in blocking Evan Corcoran from searching Donald Trump's office proper for classified documents, because remember, Evan Corcoran then went on to certify to the federal government, to the Department of Justice, that all documents had been returned. Well, we now know that he was blocked, right? He was turned away from Donald Trump's office. So first of all, I don't know how he felt comfortable certifying that all documents were turned over. But setting that aside, if other people were involved in trying to keep those documents hidden from the federal government when they came a calling for the return of the documents, what that does is it potentially expands the circle of co-conspirators. So we don't know who blocked Evan Corcoran, but we know that it feels like the criminal conspiracy may be growing.
Now, the fact that prosecutors even know this is owed to the fact that attorney-client privilege was able to be pierced, and that was in an appeals court. So is Evan Corcoran no longer representing Trump then?
Yeah, that's a great question. So once Evan Corcoran was forced to testify in the grand jury about Donald Trump in a very real sense against Donald Trump, he withdrew from representing Donald Trump in the classified documents investigation. Interestingly, he didn't withdraw, at least at that point, from representing him in the insurrection investigation. I happen to think with these developments, he must feel like he's reaching a point where he's going to have to withdraw from all representation of Donald Trump, because it's pretty clear he is now a witness against Donald Trump. And if you're an attorney, you can't have dual loyalties. You can't represent somebody that you will be called upon to testify against in a criminal trial.
Now, I know that you had just spoken about the fact that we're likely to see broader conspiracy charges because we now know that there was other Trump associates who were involved in basically ensuring that Evan Corcoran wouldn't find the documents that were stashed away in Trump's office. But to what extent is Trump liable in a development like this where lawyers surrounding him, working for him, are then running cover for him and basically misleading other lawyers like Evan Corcoran? Does that increase Trump's own liability, or does that just reflect poorly or increase the legal exposure on those other people?
It's either one or both. And I think the devil's always in the evidentiary details. We don't know what we don't know. But let's put it this way. This recent revelation that somebody blocked Evan Corcoran from searching Donald Trump's office, where all the really good, highly sensitive classified documents were. We know that because the FBI found them shortly thereafter, courtesy of a federally issued search warrant. What we don't know is whether Donald Trump directed that somebody go tell Evan Corcoran, he ain't looking in my office, or whether some Trump, lackey or lapdog did that on his or her own. We don't quite know. What I am comfortable saying is that this development can't possibly inure to Donald Trump's benefit, because what we know is that it was generally known at Mar-a-Lago that DOJ, that the federal government, that the National Archives had been begging and pleading and cajoling and ultimately subpoenaing the return of these documents. And what we also know as a matter of fact is that when it was all said and done and the FBI went in there with a search warrant, they found some of the most highly sensitive classified documents in Donald Trump's office and indeed in Donald Trump's desk drawers. So nothing about this development can help Donald Trump, but what we don't know yet is whether this is yet another evidentiary nail in Donald Trump's coffin.
How do we even know this update from Evan Corcoran? Are Corcoran's attorneys leaking this stuff? And because we've spoken about this before, and you've explained that it's very unlikely that prosecutors themselves are leaking it, so that would make the only other option either Corcoran himself or his attorneys. And if it is Corcoran's attorneys, what's the benefit in that?
Yeah, great question. And, it's always a curiosity when things that are presented to the grand jury, which is a secret proceeding by law, begin to seep out into the public square. Now, because I was a former career prosecutor, people may look at my claim that it's generally not prosecutors or FBI agents who are leaking these things with some skepticism, like, yeah, Glenn,
Yeah.
you're just protecting your own. I don't think that's the case. I think most often the way this information makes its way into the public square is the witness himself or herself or their lawyer ends up talking about what happened in the grand jury to someone, maybe to a reporter, maybe to a friend or family member, maybe to a fellow lawyer, because it's important for people to know that the witness himself or herself has no legal prohibition against disclosing what they testified to in the grand jury. This has the feel like, Evan Corcoran and or his lawyer might be releasing some of this information because there's so much infighting going on between and among Donald Trump's former and current attorneys that I can almost promise you some of Donald Trump's attorneys will end up as co-defendants, probably co-conspirators in the indictment that Jack Smith ultimately brings for the classified documents crimes. And this may just be Evan Corcoran and his lawyer's way of sort of getting some information out there publicly that, look, my guy, Evan Corcoran, did nothing wrong. Perhaps he was misled, and maybe he wasn't quite as diligent as he should have been, insisting, for example, of searching Donald Trump's office before certifying all classified documents had been returned. But, this, I think, revelation could tend to make Evan Corcoran look a little bit less culpable, even if it makes him look a little bit negligent.
But Glenn, if Evan Corcoran and his team have to jump through hoops and take all of these extra steps, assuming this is all true, to kind of shield him from any further legal exposure, then wouldn't it make sense that like Corcoran also wouldn't see the benefit in continuing to represent Donald Trump in the January 6th case also? Like if for the same client they basically have to prove to the public that he isn't culpable for all of these mistakes that Trump and his criminal cabal are making, then why continue to represent the guy in a concurrent case?
Yeah, if you asked me to give reasonable explanations why Donald Trump's, band of lawyers,
Yeah.
do certain things or decline to do certain things, I promise you that I can't give you a reasonable explanation. It absolutely makes sense to me that once Evan Corcoran is, in a very real sense, a witness against Donald Trump, he needs to get off, all representation of Donald Trump in all matters. But as we know, the whole MAGA thing standing for make attorneys get attorneys, that seems to be par for the course with Team Trump.
Now, let's finish off with this. Where do we stand on the classified documents case? I'm reading a lot of reporting that this case is winding down, but can you give like an overview of where we're standing in this case?
Yeah, I hope that's not just wishful thinking that it's winding down and that Jack Smith is prepared to issue indictments. Here's one thing I will say. There was reporting recently that it's been a few weeks now since witnesses have gone before the grand jury investigating the classified documents crimes. Let me tell you what that brings to mind for me. After federal prosecutors have presented all of the witnesses, all of the evidence to the grand jury, there is this little bit of a lull, a little bit of downtime, because what we do is we take a step back and we finish up what we call a CIM, a case impression memoranda, or a prosecution report, and we put everything into that report, all of the facts, all of the evidence, all of the law we believe applies to the facts and evidence that have been developed before the grand jury. And then we reach a conclusion and we make a prosecutorial decision. Do we ask the grand jury to indict? If so, who do we ask them to indict and on what charges? It kind of feels like this lull right now might be when the prosecutors are getting together, pouring through everything, documenting everything, and engaging in that analysis and reaching a decision, yay or nay, whether to ask the grand jury to vote out charges. I kind of feel like that may be where we are. And if that is where we are, then frankly, we could see an indictment within a matter of weeks.
Okay, so just to game this out, if that is where we are and we do see an indictment in a matter of weeks, can you give just the timeline on what would have to happen immediately thereafter?
Yeah, so once an indictment is returned, ordinarily what happens is we go to the judge, we say the grand jury has returned an indictment, and Your Honor, we need you to issue a bench warrant for the arrest of the person who was just indicted. That's how it works in 99% of the cases. However, in a case like this, and frankly, in other white collar cases where there is perhaps no risk that the defendant is going to be out there, committing additional violent crimes, sometimes instead of seeking that bench warrant to arrest the person who's been indicted, we will reach out to the targets or the defendant's criminal defense attorneys, and we will set up a time to negotiate a voluntary turn-in. And we saw that happen up in New York with Donald Trump. They didn't send the marshals down or law enforcement agents down to arrest him. They negotiated a voluntary turn-in sometime in the near future, not long after the grand jury returns the indictment. That's what I suspect will happen next. Donald Trump will turn himself in. He will go through the ordinary booking procedures. I think unlike what happened in New York, they catered to him a little bit for reasons that they believed were valid. I don't believe that will happen in the federal system. He will go through the normal booking procedures, and he will then be presented to the judge, and he will be arraigned on the indictment, which just means he will be formally read the charges that the grand jury returned against him. And then a next court date will be set. And of course, the judge will discuss possible conditions on his pretrial release and what those might look like.
And is there going to be any urgency to move faster, given the fact that the DOJ could run into a situation where the election will already have happened by the time that they set a trial date? So isn't this the kind of thing where if you're dealing with somebody's criminality who then has the opportunity to quash this very investigation if he does become president and does get to name his own attorney general, isn't there like an added sense of urgency to get this done at a faster clip so as to prevent that from happening?
Practically speaking, I would say yes. As far as the health and vitality and indeed viability of our democracy is concerned, I would say yes. Legally speaking, I'm not sure the authorities will see it that way. They'll say, listen, we're going to kind of have this case take the ordinary path through the criminal justice system. But, it's really hard to believe that we're sitting here talking about how, if somebody is charged with a crime, prosecuted and convicted for that crime, that person may soon find himself in a position to pardon himself or, to pardon others, co-conspirators who were part of his criminal course of conduct. And yet, as you point out, that's where we are. I hope that is weighing on the mind of the prosecution team, and they kind of move as quickly as the federal criminal justice system is capable of moving.
Last question, I promise. If the DOJ has decided to move forward with an indictment and just gaming this out in the future, God forbid, Donald Trump does become president, could Donald Trump's own DOJ then undermine their own ability to move forward with this prosecution of the indictment that they'd already sought?
The answer, sadly, is yes. And we saw a variation on that theme when Mike Flynn, not once but twice, pleaded guilty in federal court to federal crimes. And the Department of Justice, Bill Barr, swooped in and shit-canned that case. I'm sorry, I was looking for a nicer way to put it. But
that works.
Even that's a little too polite for what Bill Barr did with the prosecution against Mike Flynn. So the answer is yes, they could come in and Donald Trump could again appoint a corrupt attorney general who could order the dismissal of the pending criminal case against Donald Trump. Again, I ask myself every day, how in the world did we get here?
Yeah. Well, obviously, if that's not a kick in the ass for people to make sure that we all do whatever we can to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get into office again, I don't know what is. So with that said, obviously, this case is, we're finding out new developments almost on a daily basis. So if you want to keep on top of this stuff, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.